LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the September 2nd edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me and Cheech the Cat here for what'll be the 13 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. You can see my main topic has to do with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or as I'm asking the question in my title, Israeli Crime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's not something I made up. You'll see it will come up in one of the early news summaries about the discovery of the bodies of 6 hostages in Gaza in the tunnels under Rafah over the weekend, including the body of the American-Israeli Hersh Goldberg-Polin, who spoke at the Democratic convention. His parents, the parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin spoke at the Democratic convention. So there is an American political angle, but there was not really good reporting on the big five corporate outlet shows. I'm going to have to show you a news summary actually from this MSNBC show called The Weekend that I've been watching since it started several months ago. And I actually decided to take my political comedy from their show on Saturday. This is before the breaking news, so I guess more of a comedic mood than after this news of 6 dead bodies found in Gaza. And one of the things I've noticed on the show The Weekend is they often put the hosts and the guests in boxes, even when they're in like the same studio, and when they like gesticulate like I do in my shows a lot. They like get these weird interactions between their boxes, but they took it to like another level in like the second hour Saturday morning. This is Michael Steele and Simone Sanders-Townsend, and this in some ways this is to me this is like in the multiverse when like different dimensions collide. That's what I think this clip is over here.
Cheers, Michael. Cheers. Welcome back to the weekend, everyone. Election day is now 66 days away, but early voting?
Okay. Maybe I oversold the political comedy clip in the whole like colliding multiverse thing, but anyway, it was a weak political comedy clip, I admit it, but I'm going to make up for it with my analysis of the main topic. And the thing I want to show you here first is, do you hear mewing off in the distance? The thing I want to show you first is a news summary about the protests in Israel. There were really big protests over the weekend, and then a general strike today. And they're protesting the Prime Minister, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because they think that he is holding on, that he's slow walking the negotiations to get these hostages free. And some of these hostages that just died were set to be among the first released if this deal had gone through, but he's setting up these new conditions, what's called the Philadelphi Corridor between Gaza and Egypt. He wants Israeli troops to indefinitely occupy that, and even Egypt isn't agreeing to that, and I'll talk about that a little more after. Well, I want to show you this news summary from Matt Butler talking to Michael Steele and giving like information. This is at the same time that all of the big five corporate outlet programs, including NBC News Meet the Press, very little of this information made it onto that program, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Matt Butler's important information not getting to you through most of the U.S. media, but it's on MSNBC, not NBC. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway, I've over-introduce the clip as usual, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
If you could give us also, as you look at the crosshairs of, as you just mentioned, the humanitarian impact, obviously, on the Palestinian people in Gaza, the hostages and their circumstance, what are you hearing about how that, particularly with these hostages' death, changed the scenario and the pressure to get that ceasefire in place that's been sort of lagging behind, these narratives? I mean, it's not pulling the agenda forward enough. Do you think this may shift that effort some? And have we heard anything from the families of the hostages that were killed?
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael, and it's kind of the question on everybody's lips here in Israel. And I think I'm going to be answering it a little bit better like a couple hours from now after we see what goes on tonight. Like I said, this is expected to be a pretty big protest, and there have already been some really big protests. But these series of deaths, these 6 people, the discovery of their bodies, really vindicates the hostage families and a lot of these protesters who have been saying time and time again that there is no military solution to getting these hostages back. And that has been the line from really October 7th onwards. And Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing ministers in what is the most right-wing cabinet in Israeli history, they have said over and over again, we are applying military pressure on Hamas, and that will move the dial. That will get them to the table to agree to a hostage swap, to agree to some kind of deal, and they will not stop their military operation, according to Netanyahu and his ministers, until Hamas is completely destroyed. Obviously, Hamas is never going to sign up to a deal that sees them completely destroyed. And now Benjamin Netanyahu is putting up new roadblocks, new demands in these negotiations that the United States has really been sticking to and pouring, the Biden administration pouring a lot of diplomatic resources into. We saw last week there were negotiations in Cairo and Doha. They're expected kind of to continue, even though they're shrouded in pessimism from all sides. But this is a demand that Benjamin Netanyahu has to keep soldiers on what is called the Philadelphi Corridor. And that is just another name for the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. That's considered a non-starter for Hamas, and it has been very controversial for the Egyptians who share that border. And a lot of senior officials within not just politicians, but also within the top brass of the military here in Israel, they've been saying that Benjamin Netanyahu's demands are just dilatory measures. He's just trying to stop this deal from happening, both because if he accedes to a deal that doesn't involve the total destruction of Hamas, he could see these right-wing ministers leave his cabinet. They have threatened to do that repeatedly over and over again. But also because there's a lot of thinking here, and we even heard this from the Biden administration just a couple of months ago, from Biden himself, that there's a possibility that Benjamin Netanyahu is delaying this deal because he's worried that once there's a deal, he will be voted out of office, and then the law will catch up with him. The judges will throw him in jail for corruption allegations that he has already been facing. So in many ways, and it is not uncommon to hear this in the press and even among people who are not particularly left-wing here in Israel, that Benjamin Netanyahu is sacrificing the lives of these hostages in order to save his own skin legally. This is something you hear all the time, and we've been hearing it from the White House as well. And that is why the anger on the streets tonight is expected to be so fierce and so palpable. Guys.
All right. Matt Bradley, live from Tel Aviv.
So yeah, there was a lot of great information in Matt Bradley's report there on MSNBC that I haven't seen in even in the NBC news report, and certainly very little on Fox News in terms of the Israeli people being against Benjamin Netanyahu. And did you see that banner at the very end of Matt Bradley's report there? Crime Minister, a picture of Netanyahu that says Crime Minister, like a big, huge banner on the streets of Tel Aviv. So yeah, that's actually where I got my the title of my live stream here. And also, if you look at, you saw what Matt Bradley said there, that Netanyahu is adding new conditions, and this whole thing about occupying the Philadelphi corridor, was not recommended by the defense establishment. That he had I put a link down in the video description under sources to a Times of Israel story from August 30th. This is before the hostages were found dead. And you can see Netanyahu presented the Philadelphi Corridor as a new demand just last month, slowing the talks which had picked up momentum. In the Thursday night Security Cabinet meeting, 8 ministers voted in favor of Netanyahu's position, while only the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, voted against it because he represents the security apparatus. So, like, the army and the security apparatus say they don't need to have the troops on the Philadelphia Corridor. If you read that whole article, it's because apparently they think they can work it out with Egypt to have an effective barrier to the type of stuff they don't want to come into Gaza. And that's why they aren't requiring it that they're not recommending it. But Netanyahu is sticking to it because he doesn't want to have the war end. He doesn't want to reach a ceasefire because it'll break up his right-wing cabinet. And you'll see some hostage families. The last two clips I'm going to show you, by the way, down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all 13 clips. I'm ending with a couple of the hostage family members who are very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. I'll also have Senator Tom Cotton getting supremely fact-checked by Kristen Welker, you'll see down there. Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Lindsey Graham not really getting fact-checked by Jon Karl very much, and then Senator Tim Kaine. Those will be the 5 newsmaker clips in addition to so there are those 3 members of Congress and then 2 clips of hostage families after I get through all the newsmaker clips. But before that, I also want to show you what Matt Bradley reported about the Philadelphi Corridor and how it's been, there was actually reporting in the Israeli press where one minister said that Benjamin Netanyahu was responsible. One member of the cabinet, I think it was the defense minister, said Netanyahu was responsible for the hostage deaths because he keeps bringing this thing up. So Netanyahu went on TV today, and it was covered by all the cable networks to varying degrees. They all cut out before he finished. I thought that CNN actually had the best translation because you could actually hear what Netanyahu was saying in Hebrew, and I have a clip of that. I'm going to show you 3 minutes where he explains his whole position on the Philadelphi Corridor, which is so controversial in Israel that I'll talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
In the war against the evil axis, in this specific war against Hamas, and up in the north as well, we've set 4 goals to eliminate Hamas, to bring all of our hostages back, to secure that Gaza is not going to be a threat over Israel, and to return safely our residents in the north. 3 out of those goals, they go through one place, the Philadelphi Corridor. This is Hamas' lifeline. And I want to take a few minutes to understand what the significance, the meaning of the Philadelphia Corridor is. What is the meaning for the security of Israel? Why is it important? To make sure that the 7th of October is not going to repeat itself, as the Hamas promised that it would do. I want to show you what we had throughout the years until we went out of Gaza. You can see the Gaza Strip. The distance from Tel Aviv or Beersheba is not great, but we had an international border from the sea to Eilat. That was the international border of the state of Israel. When you look at it, zoomed in, you can see that all these borders are ours. Ashkelon, Shderot, the Kibbutzim, Kerem Shalom, and at the bottom, the Philadelphia Corridor. They're all under our control. Here what happened when we left Gaza, what happened that the borders are still in our hands. But once we left, and we left the Philadelphi Corridor. Philadelphi Corridor is the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. And once we left it, there's no barrier there against infiltration of arms and weapons and means for digging tunnels, all with the support of Iran. All these things entered Gaza, and Gaza turned into a great threat over the state of Israel because there was no barrier in the Philadelphia Corridor. That's what happened.
So yeah, that's the excerpt from the Netanyahu press conference I wanted to show you, where he he apologized for the death of the hostages at one point, that they weren't able to rescue them, but he was really adamant about this new demand that they control the border between Gaza and Egypt, even though his own security establishment, if you read that Times of Israel article that I put down in the video description, there's a link down there, and it says that, and it's, reported extensively, that his own security establishment says that they can depend on Egypt through unspecified means to keep that border secure. And there's a big sentiment in Israel. And like I said, you'll see that from the hostage family clips I'm going to get to at the end of the newsmaker clips, which come after the news summaries. And now I'm going to show you the news summaries from longest to shortest. Most of them tried to cover two different stories, the 2024 campaign and Kamala Harris's big interview on CNN, where she got to explain how her positions have changed. Her values haven't changed. Some of her positions have changed, but that's her line they came up with for changing positions on certain things, was that my values haven't changed. That's the thing to remember. My values haven't changed. Which actually is not a bad spin line, although I don't know how well it would work in the real world. I know I said I was working late, but you caught me out with another woman, but my values haven't changed. I don't know. Would that work? I don't know. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that Kamala Harris did have to explain her changing her position, but Donald Trump also flip-flopped within 48 hours on abortion 3 times, it seemed. He was for the Florida abortion amendment to get rid of the 6-week ban, and then he was against it, and then he came out with this IVF position. So when you're reporting the 2024 campaign, to be fair and balanced, I guess, to use a phrase, you have to report on all those flip-flops, which ABC did. Then you'll see Fox News afterwards. No, just the Kamala Harris ones. And then, of course, they also reported on my main topic, the 6 bodies of the hostages discovered in the tunnels under Gaza. And they were the best ones in their news summary. This is also the longest news summary, but the best ones reporting on what are the issues holding up the ceasefire. You'll see a brief reference to it in this 6-minute news summary. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Good morning. Welcome to This Week. We'll have the latest developments in the race for the White House this morning, but we begin with the heartbreaking news overnight from the Middle East. The Israeli Defense Forces reported they've recovered the bodies of 6 more hostages from Gaza, including Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg-Polin, whose parents had been outspoken in pushing for a ceasefire to bring the hostages home. President Biden reacted in a statement overnight saying he was, quote, devastated and outraged by the news. ABC's Britt Clennett has the latest from Tel Aviv. Good morning, Britt.
Hi, John. Yeah, heartbreak, as you say, for the family of Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg-Polin. The IDF announcing they found his body yesterday, along with 5 others, in a tunnel in southern Gaza. Israel confirming the deaths of 6 more hostages in Gaza, including Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg-Polin. The other 5, Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, Carmel Gat, Eden Yerushalmi, and Ori Danino. IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari saying the hostages were killed a short while before we reached them, recovered from tunnels under Rafah, where another hostage, Fahad al-Qadi, was rescued alive earlier in the week. 23-year-old Hersh seen here alive on April 24th in this proof-of-life video released by Hamas. President Biden expressing his sorrow over Hersh's death in a statement saying he is devastated and outraged, saying he is grieving with Hersh's parents, Rachel and Jonathan, who were on stage at the DNC, emotional as the crowd chanted, "Bring them home."
This is a political convention. But needing our only son and all of the cherished hostages home is not a political issue. It is a humanitarian issue.
Speaking to us in Jerusalem in July, Rachel and Jonathan saying time is running out.
I think something that's lost in this is the urgency. We know that many of the hostages have died in captivity.
The Hostage Families Forum releasing a statement blaming delays, sabotage and excuses, writing, "It's time to bring our hostages home." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this morning saying, "Those who kill abductees do not want a deal. We will not let up." Hostage families demanding Netanyahu be accountable for the deaths and take responsibility for their abandonment. And a security official telling ABC News this morning that 3 of those hostages, including Hersh, were on a draft proposal to be released in the first phase of a ceasefire.
And Britt, where do the ceasefire talks stand now after all this?
Well, President Biden overnight said he thinks that we are on a verge of having an agreement, but that optimism, it just isn't reflected on the ground. Now, while the U.S., Egypt and Qatar are very keen to keep discussions alive, there has been no breakthrough. That's the reality. Earlier this week, Israel's war cabinet determined that the IDF would remain in the Philadelphi Corridor, which we know is one of Hamas's red lines. So the idea that there would be still an Israeli presence at the Egypt-Gaza border, it remains a huge sticking point. John?
All right, Britt, thank you. We turn now to the 2024 race on this Labor Day weekend. Labor Day is a time to mark the end of summer and the beginning of a fall campaign, and this year, the season of the campaign pivot. For Kamala Harris, we've seen significant changes from the positions that she took the last time she ran for president. Back then, she billed herself as a progressive who would fight for Medicare for all, the Green New Deal. She favored decriminalizing illegal border crossings. Now she bills herself as a tough-on-crime career prosecutor, proposing policies that are designed to appeal to the middle. She said this week that while some of her policies may have changed, her values have not. Whatever the reason for those policy changes, moving to the center makes political sense. While the voices on the left and the right are the loudest, that's clear, our new ABC News poll shows that that's not where most voters are. The biggest chunk of Americans, 41%, call themselves moderate, compared to just 24% who say they are liberal and 32% who say they are conservative. As for Trump, his policy flips have been even more dramatic and rapid fire on an issue that Republican strategists worry will hurt the party in November: abortion rights. Just this week, he came out for government funding of IVF treatments. That's something his own running mate voted against just a few months ago. He suggested he favored an amendment in Florida that would guarantee abortion rights. And then, just a couple days later, he said he would vote against that amendment. Trump has taken just about every possible position on the abortion issue, many of them just in the last several days. So where does the race stand? Our new poll shows that the Harris-Walz ticket holds a slight 52 to 46% lead nationally among likely voters, but that's almost exactly where it was before the Democratic convention. And in the 538 polling average of the 7 key battleground states, the race is statistically tied. Harris's number is slightly higher in 6 of the 7 states, but all are within the margin of error. We're now less than 10 days away from seeing Donald Trump and Kamala Harris on the stage for the very first time. The ABC News presidential debate in Philadelphia is, of course, on September 10th. So let's bring in one of Trump's biggest supporters, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina.
And I'm going to have a Senator Lindsey Graham clip coming up. But I want to show you the rest of the news summaries. Like I said, that one was the only one that actually mentioned the Philadelphi Corridor and that issue and the anger at Benjamin Netanyahu. You're going to see something very different from Fox News Sunday, Trey Yingst reporting from Israel. They'll also have Lucas Tomlinson reporting on the 2024 race. And like I said before I showed the ABC clip, they talk about Kamala Harris changing her positions and having to explain them in her interview. Nothing, though, about Trump, unless I missed it. I'll have to watch it again with you and we'll see. But I'm pretty sure that doesn't come up in this next news summary. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. There is breaking news out of the Middle East. Israel says it has recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in Gaza. The Israeli military says all 6 were killed shortly before IDF troops attempted to rescue them. Among those lost, 23-year-old American Hersh Goldberg-Polin, who was taken from the music festival on October 7th, where so many young civilians lost their lives or were captured by Hamas terrorists. His parents, Jon Polin and Rachel Goldberg, have been high-profile advocates for families of all the hostages, speaking out at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago last month. Reacting to the news, President Biden said, quote, Hamas leaders will pay for these crimes, and that he would, quote, keep working around the clock for a deal to secure the release of the remaining hostages. Trey Yingst is live at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv with the very latest. Hello, Trey.
Shannon, good morning. Devastating news for the Israeli people who woke up to learn that the bodies of 6 hostages were recovered from Gaza. 3 of those hostages were set to be released as part of a humanitarian exchange once a ceasefire was implemented, I'm told. Among the group was 23-year-old American citizen Hersh Goldberg-Polin. President Biden released a statement overnight saying he was devastated and outraged, adding that the bodies were recovered from a tunnel underneath Rafah. The Israeli military says the hostages were executed by Hamas.
A few hours ago, we updated the families that the bodies of their loved ones were located by IDF forces in an underground tunnel in Rafah. According to a preliminary assessment available to us, they were brutally murdered by Hamas terrorists shortly before we reached them.
The horrible news comes as there is a huge effort underway as we speak to get the children of Gaza vaccinated against polio. Starting today, there will be daily humanitarian pauses in certain parts of the Strip to allow for vaccine distribution. This will allow for 640,000 children to receive their doses. The UN-led effort began after the first case of polio was detected in Gaza in 25 years. With the war raging on inside the Strip, there are still hopes for the possibility of a ceasefire agreement. Working groups are still gathering this week to discuss a possible deal between Israel and Hamas. Shannon.
All right, Trey, we will check back with you later in the show to talk more about that on this breaking news story. Thank you. Now turning to the final weeks of campaign 2024, as both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Harris focus on key battleground states that will likely decide which of them takes the White House in November. In a moment, we'll talk with Harris-Walz campaign surrogate, Senator Tim Kaine. And later, Trump Vance campaign senior official Corey Lewandowski. But first, we go to Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Hello, Lucas.
Shannon, Democrats have represented the White House for 12 of the past 16 years. Vice President Kamala Harris believes voters want change and thinks she's the one who best represents it.
People are ready to turn the page on that.
In her first sit-down interview since becoming her party's nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris wants voters to believe she has also turned the page on a host of issues, including fracking.
Will you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking your first day in office?
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020, that I would not ban fracking. As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
Here's Harris in 2020 at the vice presidential debate.
Joe Biden will not end fracking. He has been very clear about that.
A new Fox News poll shows Kamala Harris with a slight lead over Donald Trump in Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada, states Trump lost 4 years ago. In North Carolina, Trump is up 1 point in a state he won back in 2020. Trump was leading in all 4 states earlier this year when President Biden was his opponent. In February, Trump was up 5 points in North Carolina. In April, Trump had a 6-point lead in Georgia. And in June, Trump was up 5 points in both Arizona and Nevada. Vice President Harris returns to the campaign trail tomorrow on Labor Day, making stops in Detroit and joins President Biden in Pittsburgh. Donald Trump sits down with our own Sean Hannity for a town hall Wednesday night in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Shannon?
All right, Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Thank you, Lucas. Joining us now, Harris Wald's campaign surrogate, Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. Good to have
And I will have a clip of Senator Tim Kaine, one of the few mentions on Fox News or on Fox News Sunday or on Fox News of dissent within the Israeli cabinet about what they're doing in terms of the ceasefire and hostage deals, although not as explicitly as you saw on ABC. One other thing I couldn't help thinking the first time I saw that Trey Yingst report is, well, I don't know what social media you look at and what kind of people you follow, but my Facebook and Twitter, or I guess X feeds, have been full of pictures of like dead and injured Palestinian children for almost a year now, and you never seem to see those pictures on Fox News of the dead and injured children, but getting polio vaccines, all of a sudden they're showing Palestinian children. I guess when there's a humanitarian effort underway and you see healthy children being vaccinated, that will make it on Fox News. I just had to point that out. And I think, as I mentioned before I showed the clip, they showed, and there was even like a chyron there about Kamala Harris's many flip-flops have to be explained in her interview. Nothing about Trump, which didn't seem very fair and balanced to me. They show actual video of Trump's flip-flops in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary from Kristen Welker I'm about to show. And they cover the change in position of Kamala Harris as well. And they talk about my main topic, or just the breaking news over the weekend of these 6 hostage bodies discovered. And I'll talk about that news summary a little more, which is just a little bit shorter than Fox News, after we watch the clip together over here.
Good Sunday morning. Former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will face off in their first debate next week, as new polling shows just how competitive the race is, with just over 2 months until Election Day. Nationally, Harris is leading Trump 48 to 47% in a Wall Street Journal poll of registered voters. A Quinnipiac poll shows Harris up 2 points among likely voters, 49 to 47%. In the battleground states, according to a set of Bloomberg Morning Consult polls, Harris and Trump are tied in Arizona and North Carolina. Harris is narrowly ahead in Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. And Harris is ahead outside the margin of error in Wisconsin. This week, the vice president sat down for her first interview since becoming the nominee and was pressed on why she shifted positions on some issues, from fracking to Medicare for all to immigration, since she first ran for president back in 2019.
I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
And this morning, there are new signs the issue of abortion is front and center in this race, as a growing share of voters, and particularly women, rank abortion second after the economy and give Harris an edge on the issue. For former President Trump, it's yet again posing political landmines. On Thursday, he was pressed by my colleague Dasha Burns about whether he would support an amendment that would overturn his home state of Florida's 6-week abortion ban.
There's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6-week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I'm voting that I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
But the very next day, after a backlash from anti-abortion advocates, Mr. Trump said he couldn't back the amendment.
Are you voting yes or no on Amendment 4 in Florida?
So I think 6 weeks, you need more time than 6 weeks. I've disagreed with that right from the early primaries. When I heard about it, I disagreed with it. At the same time, the Democrats are radical because the 9 months is just a ridiculous situation where you can do an abortion in the 9th month. And, you know, some of the states like Minnesota and other states have it where you could actually execute the baby after birth. And all of that stuff is unacceptable. So I'll be voting no for that reason.
Now, less than 1% of abortions happen at 21 weeks or later, and usually because of catastrophic health risks or lethal fetal abnormalities. And of course, infanticide is illegal in all 50 states. We will have more on all of that in a moment. But first, a devastating turn in the Israel-Gaza war. Israeli forces have recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in Gaza, including Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg-Polin, whose parents met with world leaders pressing for his release, even speaking at the Democratic National Convention last month.
Anyone who is a parent or has had a parent can try to imagine the anguish and misery that John and I and all the hostage families are enduring.
Bring them home.
The Israeli Defense Forces said that the bodies were recovered on Saturday from an underground tunnel in the southern Gaza city of Rafah in an operation by the IDF, saying all 6 had been killed shortly before they were to be rescued by Israeli forces. In a statement, Vice President Kamala Harris said Hamas is an evil terrorist organization. With these murders, Hamas has even more American blood on its hands. President Biden spoke on Saturday night.
It's time this war ended. We should end this war. I think we're on the verge of having an agreement. It's just time to end it.
And joining me now is Republican Senator Tom Cotton.
And yeah, I'm going to have an epic cross-examination, epic fact check of Senator Tom Cotton by NBC's Kristen Welker. That'll be the first newsmaker clip I show after the last 2 news summaries. But I thought of that news summary, you can juxtapose those first 3 because they each tried to cover the changing positions of the candidates in the 2024 election. Of course, Fox News left out the abortion flip-flop by Donald Trump, but the other 2 had both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump explaining their changing positions. And they all said, polls are tied. It's basically a tied race. Even Fox News reported that. So those were the 3 news summaries that tried to combine that with the breaking news and the situation in Gaza and the increasing unrest or protests in the streets against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to use a phrase that I showed, the banner from the protests. And now I'm going to show the last 2 news summaries, a little bit shorter. They only focus on the breaking news. CBS Nancy Cordes is in as the host, and then they have their reporter I believe in Tel Aviv. I'm not sure. We'll find out when we watch it. Reporting, and CBS usually does the best on reporting more in terms of the Palestinian perspective, opposite of what you just saw on Fox News. And I'll talk about that news summary a little more after we watch together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret is off today. We begin this morning with new details from the Middle East, where the Israeli military says the bodies of the hostages in Gaza were found in a tunnel. One of the hostages was Hersh Goldberg-Polin, a 23-year-old American-Israeli who was abducted from a music festival, one of 250 hostages taken captive on October 7th of last year. In a statement last night, President Biden said he was, quote, devastated and outraged, and recalled that Hersh had lost his arm helping friends and strangers during the attack. Imtiaz Tyab is in Tel Aviv this morning with the latest.
His name is Hersh.
The parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin worked tirelessly to keep Israel's hostage crisis on the global stage. Even addressing last month's Democratic Party convention.
Hersh, if you can hear us, we love you. Stay strong. Survive.
Following the announcement, the 23-year-old Israeli American's remains had been recovered from a tunnel in southern Gaza, his family released a statement saying, "With broken hearts, the Goldberg-Polin family is devastated to announce the death of their beloved son and brother, Hersh." The bodies of 5 other hostages have also been recovered: Carmel Gat, Eden Yerushalami, Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sarusi, and Master Sergeant Ori Danino. According to the Israeli media, preliminary autopsy reports have found all 6 were shot in the head. The Israeli military has said Hamas was responsible for their brutal murders, and also said the remains were discovered not far from where another hostage, Farhan al-Qadi, was found alive just last week. The news of the killings has triggered grief and anger across Israel, with many Israelis blaming the deaths on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for, in their words, sabotaging the hostage release and ceasefire deal with Hamas that's been under negotiation for months.
All they care about is the politics, and they didn't approve to do a deal with Hamas, and so our loved ones are still there, and currently we don't see the horizon and don't know when they will be back with us.
In a taped address, Netanyahu said the Israeli government is committed to continue striving for a deal that will return all of the hostages, while President Biden told reporters it was time to end the war on Gaza.
I think we're on the verge of having an agreement. It's just time to end it. Time to finish it.
But until an agreement is reached, the violence rages on, even as the UN attempts to vaccinate 640,000 Palestinian children to prevent a major outbreak of polio in Gaza. And based on the framework of a deal Israel and Hamas have already agreed to, 3 of the 6 hostages who were killed would have been released as part of what's called the humanitarian category during the first phase of an eventual ceasefire agreement, Nancy. And Hersh Goldberg-Polin would have been one of them.
So close to freedom. Imtiaz Tyab reporting in Tel Aviv. Thank you. We are joined now by Jonathan Dekel-Chen, the father of one of the Israeli-American hostages.
And that's the last newsmaker clip I'm going to show, is that father who who is very critical of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And did you see in the report there on CBS News, they actually had another shot of the Prime Minister banner, like the one I showed you from MSNBC, also showed up in that CBS News report. And you heard some very critical comments from Israelis. You also saw the polio vaccine being administered in Gaza, although CBS has been better about showing the death and destruction in Gaza, as I was saying before I showed the clip. Let me just finish up the news summaries real quickly. This last one's just over a minute. CNN State of the Union, Dana Bash, just a brief recitation of the breaking news before talking to a spokesman for the IDF over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is grieving the loss of a fellow American. We begin with the breaking news. Israelis are on the streets protesting, demanding a ceasefire agreement, after defense officials said they recovered the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages murdered by Hamas, including Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg-Polin, who was 23 years old. An IDF spokesman said Hamas brutally killed the 6 young adults in an underground tunnel near Rafah, a short time before Israeli forces arrived. 3 of them would have been released in the early stages of a ceasefire agreement, to Israeli officials told CNN. An agreement President Biden said last night was on the verge of happening, while Vice President Harris released a statement that reads in part, "The threat Hamas poses to the people of Israel and American citizens in Israel must be eliminated, and Hamas cannot control Gaza. The Palestinian people, too, have suffered under Hamas rule for nearly 2 decades." Here with me now is IDF spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani.
And I don't have a clip of that interview because I have a clip of two other hostage parents that'll be the last two newsmaker clips I'm going to show you are hostage parent clips, very critical of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But now that I'm done with the news summaries, and you can decide who you think did it best, the first three covering the two different stories, the last two mostly. I mean, I think CBS and ABC had the best reporting on what's going on in Gaza. Fox News, of course, was the worst. I don't know how you want to fit in the other two. You can let me know in the comment section what you think. And now I'm going to show you three senators, two Republicans and a Democrat, reacting to the news, especially of the death of the American Hersh, Hersh Goldberg-Polin. I was saying Polin before. It's Hersh Goldberg-Polin. And that's a bias of all news, American news or U.S. news outlets. They always, focus on how many Americans died, how many, it's always the Americans. But I guess that's just sort of a natural tribalism, but still a bias. But that's basically the fairly easy setup question for all three of these senators, and they all went in different directions. The first one I want to show you is, of course, the cross-examination of the week. It's kind of funny if you read the transcript of this interview, this part of the interview with Kristen Welker and Senator Tom Cotton. It's like three words. There's so much crosstalk they couldn't even. It makes the transcript look all crazy. And in fact, if you want to look at that, I'm going to put a link to the full transcript of the interview there in the live comments, but I've taken the best part out of it here. And at one point, Tom Cotton gets so exasperated that he's like, you can fact check me all you want, or whatever, you can do your fact check thing, or I can't remember exactly what he said. I saw someone on social media say that his lip was quivering at one point, but I haven't watched it closely enough. Let's watch it together, and let's see, does Senator Tom Cotton, does his lip quiver during this extensive cross-examination or fact-checking from Kristen Welker? Well, let's watch it together and talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
Let's start with this devastating news, the discovery of 6 bodies, hostages, including Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg-Polin. Everyone, I think, feels heartbroken this morning, the entire nation and, frankly, world mourning these deaths. What is your reaction, Senator, and what do you think this will mean for hostage negotiations?
Well, it's terribly sad news that Hamas executed these 6 hostages in cold blood, apparently shot them in the head shortly before they might have been rescued by Israeli Defense Forces. My heart goes out to all the families, especially Hersh Goldberg-Polin's family, our fellow American. There are other fellow Americans still to be accounted for. But I think we should note that these hostages were discovered in the tunnels under Rafah. That's where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put pressure on Israel not to enter for months, used an arms embargo to try to keep them from entering. Kamala Harris even said that Israel shouldn't enter Rafah because she had studied the maps. What the Biden-Harris administration should have done from the beginning is not pressure Israel to restrain its response, but let Israel win from the very outset. For 11 months, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have put more pressure on Israel than they put on Hamas and Iran's other terror proxies.
And, Senator, just to be clear, there, of course, is no arms embargo. It is true that the Biden administration did halt one shipment of arms out of concern of civilian casualties.
No, Kristen, that's not correct.
It is correct. There's no arms embargo.
For weeks, the Biden-Harris administration put an embargo not just on large 2,000-pound bombs, which of course are needed to penetrate these deep and buried tunnels, but on things like tank rounds and artillery shells and mortar rounds.
It was just one shipment of arms. It was the 2,000-pound
Kristen, it was a large category of weapons.
500 pounds. But
it was a large category of weapons.
Okay, but they have now moved forward with that. It's not an arms embargo, though, just to be very clear. That's a very specific term, and it's not an arms embargo.
It was in place for many weeks, specifically to try to prevent Israel from entering Rafah, where these hostages were discovered. If we had simply backed Israel to the hilt from October 7th, this war would probably be over. We probably would have found many more hostages alive, and there would have been fewer civilian casualties caused by Hamas's infliction of those civilian casualties on its own people. But at every turn, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have put more pressure on Israel than they have on Iran and Hamas.
And of course, they have also argued that the U.S. stands firmly behind Israel. It was one arms shipment. Let's talk about Prime Minister
Kristen,
Netanyahu.
it was more than it was many more. Kristen,
Netanyahu
you can do your fact check thing all you want. I'm going to tell you the real facts. It was a large category of weapons, far beyond just 2,000-pound bombs.
Okay, but it wasn't an arms embargo. That's my only point. It wasn't specifically an arms embargo. Let's just move forward, though, in terms of what Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing right now, because he's been facing pressure in the wake of this. He's been resistant to accepting this hostage deal. Axios' Barak Ravid reports that a senior Israeli official said, quote, "We warned Netanyahu and the cabinet ministers about this exact scenario, but they wouldn't listen." Do you believe Prime Minister Netanyahu bears any responsibility for not getting a deal sooner?
No, I believe Hamas bears responsibility for not turning these hostages back over to their families and surrendering. At every turn, Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to meet the Biden administration halfway. They continue to move the goalposts. They continue to encourage and embolden Hamas. Consider what happened just a few weeks ago when the Prime Minister was here to speak at the Capitol. Kamala Harris didn't even sit behind him in a joint session of her Congress, one of her few duties as vice president. Then she came out after a private meeting with him and stressed that we need a ceasefire now, which is the de facto Hamas position. What did you have 2 days later? You had Israeli children being blown up on playgrounds because every time Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put more pressure on Israel, it simply emboldens Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran.
Just to be very clear, though, there is pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu. You have people protesting in the streets. He is, of course, the leader of Israel, and that's who I'm asking you about. Do you think, and would you urge him in this moment, Senator, to get a deal given these casualties?
I would urge him to finish the job against Hamas, which is exactly what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden should have done from the very beginning. Again, if we had backed Israel to the hilt, if we hadn't continually put pressure on Israel to slow and to moderate its response, Hamas would have been broken and we would have gotten more of these hostages down alive. The only time Hamas has even come close to releasing hostages is when they are on the ropes.
And of course, the U.S. has given more aid, both military and monetary, to Israel than any other country. But let's
well, to be exact, we've given hundreds of billions of dollars in relief to Iran.
Well, some of that money, of course, is frozen. But let's move on to some domestic issues.
So yeah, that was like epic fact-checking and cross-examination from Kristen Welker. I've criticized her in the past when she hasn't done well, but she came up with quite a few points there. Didn't go all the way into the whole Philadelphi Corridor thing that I was talking about at the beginning, but still talked about the criticism of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I didn't really see the lip quiver. I saw like a little, when he started to say Benjamin Netanyahu at one point, maybe he would almost said Bibi, I don't know, or if there was like a little stutter or hesitation at one point. Did not see a lip quiver, but I don't know, did somebody see it and I didn't see it? Maybe it's just a myth. Or maybe it's in some other part of the interview. That, by the way, the entire Meet the Press episode is available free on the NBC News YouTube channel at a link that to the specific episode. I put a link to the September 1st episode down in the video description under sources. I give you the sources of all my clips as best I can. So that was Senator Tom Cotton getting epically cross-examined and fact-checked. You can do your fact-check thing all you want. But whatever, that was probably the best clip, I guess, of the program. But next we have Senator Lindsey Graham not really getting much pushback from Jon Karl here, where he seems to be suggesting that either Israel or the United States or both should, the way to solve this problem is to threaten to bomb the oil fields in Iran. Tell the Ayatollah we're going to bomb the oil fields in Iran. That's going to solve the problem. When, I don't know, you saw Matt Bradley in the first news summary from MSNBC say that really what Israelis have taken from this last incident is there is not a military solution to the hostage problem. And I don't know if adding in Iran as a possible target, I don't think that really changes it much, but maybe you'll be convinced by Senator Lindsey Graham talking to Jon Karl, being asked the same softball question as Senator Tom Cotton. And even like before we get to the campaign, actually over on Fox News, they say before we get to politics, because I guess it's not political, but it kind of is political. Anyway, here's Senator Lindsey Graham on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday in this clip.
Before we get to the campaign, I want to ask you about the devastating news overnight out of Israel. I know that you have been a big advocate for the hostages, and you got to know, Senator, you got to know the parents of Hersh quite well. What's your reaction to this heartbreaking news?
Heartbroken,
yeah,
devastated, mad. John and Rachel have done everything in their power to help their son be released from captivity. After 11 months of captivity, he was murdered by Hamas. Hamas could care less about the hostages or the Palestinians. And if you want the hostages home, which we all do, you have to increase the cost to Iran. Iran is the great Satan here. Hamas is the junior partner. They're barbaric religious Nazis, Hamas. They could care less about the Palestinian people. I would urge the Biden administration and Israel to hold Iran accountable for the fate of remaining hostages and put on the target list oil refineries in Iran if the hostages are not released.
We heard from the White House overnight a statement from President Biden saying that Hamas leaders will pay for these crimes. That was what the president said.
What are they going to pay? I mean, what's the price? I mean, they've destroyed a lot of Gaza. They put their own people in harm's way. Hamas could care less about the Palestinian people. Mr. President, Bibi, if you want to really change things when it comes to the hostages, tell the Ayatollah what he values is on the target list. Until that happens, nobody's coming home.
All right, Senator Graham, I'm going to turn to the campaign.
Yes, he starts off not with the campaign, like I was saying. Pretty sure if you're saying to Biden and Bibi, you got to threaten the Ayatollah's oil fields, that seems like giving up on the luck that there's been so far. I was talking about last week where there hasn't really been much escalation, even though there was the Israeli preemptive strike on Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then Hezbollah from Lebanon sent all these Katyusha rockets and some drones that did almost no damage, and it's like there was like some sort of choreography, some sort of plan to have face-saving retaliation without the only people there who are really getting the brunt of it are the Palestinians in Gaza, where there have been reportedly over 40,000 casualties. They went over the 40,000 mark, and many of those, over 10,000, I think it was 14,000 last I heard, were children, which it kind of underlines that point I was making about the polio vaccine pictures not telling the whole story of the children of Gaza, the Palestinians there. And I'm gone way off on a tangent there, but Lindsey Graham was asking for even more death and destruction, not just focused on Gaza. That was my point, that all the death and destruction is pretty much, there was October 7th where, what was it, like 1,200 people killed by Palestinians in Israel, many of them civilians. And then since then, mostly focused on Gaza with 40,000 reportedly killed, but not a regional war. I think if the United States and Israel attacked the oil fields in Iran, that would much more likely lead to a regional war. So I have to disagree with Senator Lindsey Graham on that point. Not much pushback on any of that. Just went to the campaign there, Jon Karl, just starting with a softball question, and it's the same softball question really for Senator Tim Kaine. On ABC they said before we get to the campaign. On Fox News, Shannon Bream says to Senator Tim Kaine, before we get to politics, because this is what's going on in Israel is above politics, and we all know like it's good and evil. Of course, on Fox News, that most of the reporting they demonize Palestinians, and focus on Hamas and the terrorism. And one other thing about Lindsey Graham, it's kind of nitpicky. It's a pet peeve of mine. Did you notice like a couple times he said could care less when he meant could not care less? I mean, if your job is like being a politician and a communicator, you should say could not care less when you mean could not care less. He said it twice. If it were just once, I probably wouldn't even mention it, but he said it twice. I'm sorry. I know most of you could not care less. Am I right? I'm going to move on to Senator Tim Kaine, one of the brief moments on Fox News or on Fox News Sunday where they take a very pro-Israeli view, where he mentions like dissension in the Israeli cabinet, which you only heard brought up like brief. You didn't hear it in Trey Yingst's report, and Trey Yingst comes back and doesn't mention it again. It's only briefly mentioned right here, and then like 47 minutes into the program in a panel discussion, the one person from the left, former Obama State Department spokesperson Maria Harf. I think she was in the Obama administration, but she's the one person from the left, and she kind of mentions Israel might not be totally blameless in the lack of a hostage deal. But Tim Kaine kind of brings it up, talking to Shannon Bream with the same softball question, not political over here.
Before we get to politics, though, I want to get your reaction to the news of the loss of Hersh Goldberg-Polin. I know he spent some of his childhood in Richmond and has family there too.
It's a real tragedy. I've met his parents, and they have been tireless in coming to the Hill and talking about their son, but talking about the need to find the hostage release deal. So I can only imagine how painful this news is to them. I really feel for them today. And it just emphasizes even more, we've got to get this hostage release and ceasefire deal. The two halves have to come together. You're not going to see one without the other. It's been tantalizingly close. We're not there yet. But hopefully the tragedy will even put more of a sense of urgency in our efforts.
Do you worry that it may drive things the other way? You've got Prime Minister Netanyahu saying out there this morning that they have put forth aggressive, what he calls proposals, and that Hamas has rejected them again and again. And while they were in talks, now executes these 6. He says if you're murdering hostages, you don't want a deal.
That could be. I mean, we've certainly wondered along the way whether Hamas wants a deal or not. They don't care about the suffering of the Palestinian people. By the same token, there's also reports of internal dissension between the Prime Minister and his chief defense officials about the Israeli position. So my sense is this is very, very tough. We're getting closer. Again, let's step back and reflect on the tragedy of the loss of these 6 and see if we can really push through to a solution that would involve not just hostage release and ceasefire, but obviously the humanitarian need with polio cases now being seen in Gaza. We've got a lot to do on the humanitarian front, too.
We absolutely do. Okay, so let's talk politics.
I don't know. When Shannon Bream said we absolutely do in terms of humanitarian efforts in Gaza, do you think she was sincere? I mean, I guess the polio maybe, but that's not, that isn't completely what Senator Tim Kaine meant, I don't believe, but he did at least bring up some dissension within the Israeli cabinet about Benjamin Netanyahu's position, nothing going into the whole Philadelphi Corridor issue and how it's a recent, possibly dilatory tactic for the Prime Minister to stop from being kicked out of office and then ending up in jail. It seems kind of like the same story that's going on with the Republican nominee Donald Trump trying to get in office so that he doesn't end up in jail. I guess we'll see how it works out for Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu and possible, I don't know what you would call, I haven't come up with some sort of, I guess, convicted felon and president of the United States. Could that we have a convicted felon president of the United States? I guess that's kind of like a crime minister. I hope not, but I guess we'll see. And I pretty much pre-criticized that Fox News clip. Like I said, the whole idea of Israeli responsibility. You saw Shannon Bream there talking, making the whole argument that, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is in the right, and it's really these, Hamas monsters, terrorists who are killing hostages while negotiations are going on. Although, if you watch the other news summaries, this is one thing I forgot to mention. It kind of looks like, because the IDF first said that the hostages were killed shortly before the bodies were found, but then later it came out it was more like days, and they were found near this hostage who was rescued last week and possibly killed around that time. As part of that hostage rescue, they were like nearby in the tunnels, and they found this one guy abandoned, and maybe nearby they like killed these 6 hostages when the other hostage was rescued. But this Bedouin man, anyway, that is one other possibility that didn't really get reported much, but if you look at the CBS and the ABC reports, it's kind of like implied in there when they talk about the other hostage being rescued. Now I'm going to get to the last 2 newsmaker clips that I promised. These are hostage families. The first 2 hostage family members here are Ronan and Orna Neutra, who actually spoke at the Republican convention where they nominated Trump, and CNN's Dana Bash asks them what their message to Benjamin Netanyahu would be, and this is some of the strongest criticism, along with Jonathan Dekel-Chen, the guest of Nancy Cordes on CBS News Face the Nation. In the next clip, this is kind of the strongest criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu you'll see on any of the 5 shows on Sunday. So I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Well, on that, Prime Minister Netanyahu said he is personally committed to achieving a deal to free the remaining hostages. What is your message to him right now?
You know, Dana, we are just hoping that he's doing everything he can. The situation is dire. It's urgent. We've seen him putting all kind of hurdles. We know the Israeli people are going out in large numbers and calling the government to do what their job is, to bring the hostages home. 101 hostages left, and they're dying there. And every day is huge risk for each one of them. So we urge him to do what he's tasked to do in Israel. But just as well, we are calling on our leaders here in the United States to do what they're tasked to do. We're calling on President Biden, on Vice President Harris, to do everything in their power to reach a deal and bring the hostages back. We were warning about that kind of situation. It's such a risky time for all those hostages. I mean, Hersh managed to survive 11 months in captivity. He lost his arm. And after all of this, to be killed a few days, maybe before a deal,
yeah,
it's really devastating. Really is.
Of course it is. Orna, finally, you say a verse from Psalm 23 every day, the Psalm of David, to send your son protection. Can you share what you say before we let you go?
You know, I not only say the Psalm, you know, I pray for my son every single day. I pray for the hostages, as did Rachel Goldberg. You know, we feel that we're doing our share, you know, and praying and advocating and speaking up for them. It's time for the leaders to get this done and get them out. Enough is enough. You know, the families have been warning about this. The writing was on the wall, and this negotiation has been taking way too long. They need to come out. The leaders need to do whatever needs to be done for them to come out.
Yeah.
So there you can see the criticism that the negotiations are taking too long. Nancy Cordes on CBS News Face the Nation actually brings up with Jonathan Dekel-Chen, who's much more critical of Benjamin Netanyahu, that the Israeli opposition is calling Benjamin Netanyahu's government the death cabinet. In the final newsmaker clip I will talk about with you tonight over here.
Imtiaz report that several of the hostages who were killed were next in line to be released if there were to be a ceasefire. Who do you hold responsible for the fact that there is still no ceasefire today?
Well, the situation exists because Hamas on October 7th invaded Israel, killed nearly 1,400 people, committed mass rape, mass looting, destroyed homes and property, and has refused since October 7th to return all of the hostages. Now, that being said, given that we're dealing with Satan, I mean, that's sort of the launching point for any discussion. Israelis at large, and myself included, have been extremely critical of the Israeli government for not negotiating in good faith now for many, many months. There is no explanation, a reasonable explanation, why our government is refusing to deeply engage in these negotiations and complete them when our entire senior military establishment and intelligence community has been saying publicly and openly for weeks and months that the time has come to end the fighting in Gaza, get our hostages home, as many alive as possible. We know that many dozens of the 101 remaining hostages have already been murdered, and to end the madness in Gaza. It's simply the government that is preventing it.
You are originally from Connecticut. Your son, Sagi, is the father of 3 young girls, one of whom was born while he was in captivity. He's among 38 hostages taken from your kibbutz. What, if anything, do you know about where he is being held and what condition he is in?
Well, one small correction. On October 7th, 79 people were taken from our kibbutz and 51 slaughtered. There are 29 remaining from my kibbutz. We know that, well, he's 36 years old, father of 3 little girls. His 7-month pregnant wife miraculously survived with their 2 little girls on October 7th. The only thing that we know for sure about Sagi is that as of late November, early December, we know that he was alive, wounded but alive, and we know that because in the first hostage exchange, 40 of the 100 women and children who were released by Hamas in that first negotiation were from our kibbutz, and a handful of them had seen Sagi and other men mostly in the tunnels and could tell us that he was still alive.
Israel's opposition leader is now calling the Netanyahu government a death cabinet. He's calling for labor strikes against Netanyahu. Do you share that anger? You said that Netanyahu has not engaged seriously. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think it's just my opinion alone. I think the vast majority of Israelis now have come to believe by his actions, not his words, but by his actions, that he's been driven primarily by a desire to retain power with a narrow, very radical messianic coalition in the Israeli government. And he has made choices to pursue this fantasy of total victory over Hamas, a terrorist organization, no doubt. But this idea of total victory is a messianic one from his coalition partners and not realistic. And he's preferred that, at least to date, over the well-being of all the hostages. There are 7 Americans still remaining in Hamas captivity amongst the 101.
So, yeah, that was a really strong statement from someone who both recognizes the culpability of Hamas and the, instigating the entire situation and the taking of hostages and all the bad things Hamas does to its own people in Gaza, but also recognizing the responsibility of Benjamin Netanyahu, his right-wing government. He used the word messianic, which you don't often hear as an adjective applied to any government, or the Israeli government, or any political movement. I don't think it's a good adjective, at least in my opinion. Messianic means that you think the end times are coming and you might as well help them on their way. That's not a good thing you want to hear from people who have nuclear weapons. That's just my opinion, but you can let me know what you think in the comment section. And those are all the news clips I have to support the title of my live stream this week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You can tell me if you think he is putting the lives of hostages in danger to retain power for his right-wing messianic coalition and avoid going to jail, kind of like his buddy Donald Trump's quest to gain power and avoid going to jail here in the United States. That's kind of the big question of the week from my main topic. And now, as usual, I do have a bonus Cheech and Chong, the kittens clip. You saw Cheech, who I was holding at the beginning. Chong is over there all curled up, but I'm not going to disturb him. He looks like he's sleeping. But the one thing to know about Cheech and Chong, the kittens, which we adopted them with those names from a shelter last December. I think it was December 6th. And when we adopted them, because they were rescue cats, we don't know the exact day they were born, but their estimated date of birth was September 1st. So yesterday we celebrated their birthdays. We gave them each half a can of tuna, and we sang them happy birthday. But you know, it's an estimated birthday. For all we know, today is their birthday, but they're 1 year old, and I took a short clip of them eating their tuna while we sang them happy birthday yesterday to finish up the show over here. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Cheech and Chong. Happy birthday to you. So that was the first birthday feast of the kittens, Cheech and Chong. I guess they're not kittens anymore. They're after, I don't know when you be. I thought they keep growing for like 18 months. I thought I heard somewhere. But so are they adolescents? Are they cats? Are they? I don't know. You can wish them happy birthday in the comment section if you want. And I will be back next Monday. Oh, I see some hearts coming up for the clip. I'll be back next Monday, which will be the day before the big debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, assuming it actually takes place, which who knows if it actually will. I guess we'll probably know a lot more next Monday, when I do the live stream the day before the debate. That will probably be the big topic, but I guess you never know. And I'll be back every Monday through the January 20th inauguration of hopefully the same person who's elected in November. That's why I'm going to keep doing the show all the way through the inauguration to find out if it is the same person. So until next Monday, or until I have some other reason to upload a video during the week, which occasionally happens, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.